It all began on a cold winter morning, the kind where the air feels like it's slicing through your lungs with every breath. I was walking my usual route to the park when suddenly a sharp pain shot through my chest, a pain so intense that it felt as if someone had taken a sledgehammer and cracked open my rib cage. My knees buckled, and before I knew it, I was lying on the icy pavement, gasping for air. That day changed everything. The paramedics arrived just in time, but doctors later told me I had narrowly escaped death by mere minutes. It wasn't just a wake-up call. It was a deafening alarm screaming at me to take care of myself before it was too late. After that harrowing experience, I spent nearly 3 agonizing months in the hospital. Every day felt like an eternity, trapped between sterile white walls while machines beeped incessantly around me. Tubes snaked across my body, tethering me to life support systems that kept me alive. Simple tasks like eating or even turning over in bed became Herculean challenges. Nurses would come and go, their faces masked, but their eyes betraying pity. I hated being dependent on others, especially for basic needs. One particularly dark night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how my life had spiraled into this abyss. What made it worse was knowing this could have been avoided if only I hadn't ignored the warning signs earlier. The fatigue, the shortness of breath, the occasional dizziness. I had brushed them off as just getting older, but now I realized how dangerously wrong I'd been. During my recovery, I started noticing things about people my age that terrified me. Friends who used to hike with me were now confined to wheelchairs, their once vibrant spirits dimmed by strokes or degenerative diseases. Others whispered about cancer diagnoses during coffee meetups, their voices trembling with fear. Watching these transformations hit close to home, reminding me daily of what awaited if I didn't turn my life around. There was Mr. Chen, a former marathon runner, now unable to walk without assistance after years of neglecting his health. Then there was Mrs. Tran, diagnosed with diabetes because she indulged in sugary treats without restraint. Their stories weren't just cautionary tales, they were mirrors reflecting my potential future. The emotional toll was unbearable. I couldn't shake off the image of myself becoming a burden to my family, forced to rely on them for every little thing. Would they resent me? Would I lose my dignity along with my independence? These thoughts haunted me endlessly. But amidst the despair, I found clarity. I refused to let my golden years be defined by regret and frailty. If I wanted to live, not just survive, I needed to prioritize my health above all else. No more excuses. No more procrastination. This near-death experience taught me that good health isn't just a gift, it's the foundation upon which happiness, freedom, and purpose are built. And so I vowed to reclaim control over my body, one small step at a time. It was supposed to be the golden chapter of my life, a time to relax, enjoy the fruits of decades of hard work, and bask in the warmth of family. But fate had other plans. After my near-death experience and months spent recovering in the hospital, I thought I had turned a corner. My health was improving thanks to daily exercise and a positive mindset, but little did I know that an even greater storm loomed on the horizon. One fateful afternoon, a charming salesperson knocked on my door, offering what seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, a guaranteed investment with returns so high they sounded almost too good to be true. At first, I hesitated. After all, I'd always prided myself on being cautious, but their promises of financial freedom and tales of others who had supposedly struck gold were intoxicating. Against my better judgment, I handed over my entire life savings, believing this would secure my future. Weeks passed, then months without any sign of the promised returns. Panic set in as I realized I had fallen victim to a pyramid scheme. The money I had worked tirelessly for, the cushion meant to protect me in old age, was gone, vanished into thin air. The weight of this loss crushed me more than any physical ailment ever could. For the first time in years, I found myself standing outside my son's house, clutching a small envelope containing a grocery list. Asking for help felt like swallowing shards of glass. Every word caught in my throat as shame burned through me. I hated feeling like a burden, yet there was no other choice. Each trip to the market now required pleading eyes and awkward conversations about expenses I once covered effortlessly. The strain didn't stop at my own humiliation. It seeped into the fabric of our family. My daughter, already juggling her career and raising two young children, began snapping under the pressure. "Mom, we can't keep doing this," she said one evening, her voice trembling between frustration and despair. "We're drowning too." Her words cut deeper than any knife. Meanwhile, my son avoided eye contact during family dinners, his jaw tightening whenever bills were mentioned. Arguments erupted frequently, each one chipping away at the bond we once cherished. What was meant to be a peaceful retirement turned into a battleground where guilt and resentment reigned supreme. What made it worse was seeing how my misfortune affected my grandchildren. They stopped visiting as often, sensing the tension in the air. Toys went unplayed with, laughter disappeared from our home, replaced by heavy silences and forced smiles. It wasn't just my dignity that crumbled, it was the joy and harmony of our entire household. That's when I understood something crucial. Financial independence isn't just about personal comfort. It's the foundation upon which familial relationships thrive or falter. Without it, love becomes strained, patience wears thin, and trust erodes. As the months dragged on after my financial disaster, the cracks in my family began to widen into chasms. My son and daughter, already stretched thin by their own responsibilities, started whispering about options behind closed doors. One evening during a particularly tense family dinner, the conversation I had been dreading finally came to light. "Mom," my son said hesitantly, his voice trembling with guilt, "we've been thinking maybe it would be better if you moved to an assisted living facility." His words hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and reeling. How could they even consider this? Didn't they see that I was still trying to rebuild myself after everything I'd lost? But as much as I wanted to lash out, I couldn't deny the truth. I had become a burden. My constant complaints about my health, my inability to contribute financially, and my lingering bitterness over being scammed, these things were suffocating them. The situation grew worse when my grandchildren began pulling away. At first, I thought it was just the natural distance that comes with busy lives. But one day while visiting my granddaughter Emily, I overheard her talking to her mother in hushed tone. "I don't want Grandma to come over anymore," she whispered. "She's always criticizing us or telling stories we've heard a million times. It's exhausting." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Was this how they saw me now? a bitter, nagging old woman who had nothing positive to offer. I tried to defend myself, but no amount of explanation could bridge the growing divide between us. The more I protested, the more distant they became, until family gatherings turned into awkward silences, punctuated by forced smiles. What truly broke my heart, though, was watching the once strong bond between my children crumble under the weight of unresolved generational conflicts. My daughter accused my son of not doing enough to help me, while he shot back that she was too controlling and critical. Their arguments escalated from quiet disagreements to full-blown shouting matches, each one tearing at the fabric of our family. One night, after yet another explosive fight, I found myself sitting alone in the dark, clutching a photo album filled with happier memories. Tears streamed down my face as I flipped through pictures of birthdays, vacations, and holidays. Moments when we were still whole, still connected. Now, all that remained was a fractured family held together by threads of obligation rather than love. The breaking point came when my son announced he was moving his family across the country for a job opportunity. "It's not about you, Mom," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "We need this fresh start." Fresh start. That phrase echoed in my mind long after he left, a painful reminder of how far we had fallen. My daughter stayed closer, but our relationship was strained, marked by a palpable tension whenever we spoke. She visited less frequently, and when she did, it felt like charity rather than genuine affection. Each visit ended with a sense of relief on both sides, as if we were merely enduring each other's company. Looking back, I realized that none of this had to happen. If only I had adapted to their world instead of clinging to mine. If only I had offered emotional support instead of criticism, perhaps we could have avoided this tragedy. Instead, I allowed fear and stubbornness to dictate my actions, alienating the very people I loved most. And now here I sit, surrounded by silence, wondering if there will ever be a chance to repair what has been broken. In the wake of everything, my health scare, financial collapse, and fractured family relationships, I thought I had hit rock bottom. But life, as it often does, had one more cruel twist in store for me: the feeling of being left behind by the relentless march of modern technology. It started innocently enough. My grandchildren would visit, their faces glowing with excitement as they showed me photos on their phones or talked about how easy it was to order groceries online. At first, I smiled and nodded, pretending to understand. But deep down, a gnawing sense of inadequacy began to take root. One day, Emily handed me her phone and said, "Grandma, can you send this picture to Mom? Just tap here." Her instructions seemed simple, but to me, they might as well have been written in an alien language. When I fumbled and failed, her cheerful demeanor faltered, replaced by a fleeting look of pity that cut deeper than any criticism ever could. The humiliation only worsened when I realized just how dependent I had become on others for even the simplest tasks: paying utility bills, booking appointments, managing finances. All things I once handled with pride now required assistance. There was one particularly mortifying incident at the grocery store. Standing in line with my cart full of essentials, I watched as everyone around me frivolously tapped their phones to pay. When it was my turn, I pulled out cash, only to be met with impatient sighs from the cashier and irritated glances from the people behind me. The cashier finally called over a younger colleague to help me count out exact change, and I felt like a relic from another era, utterly out of place in this fast-paced, digital world. On the way home, I broke down in tears. How had I let myself fall so far behind? What made it worse was knowing that my children were too busy to teach me, and my grandchildren saw me as someone who couldn't keep up rather than a source of wisdom and guidance. But perhaps the most devastating blow came not from technology, but from time itself. As the years passed, I began to notice that my circle of friends was shrinking. First, there was Mrs. Nguyen, who passed away suddenly after a brief illness. Then Mr. Chen followed, his once vibrant energy extinguished by a stroke. Each loss left a gaping hole in my life, a reminder of my own mortality. The weekly card games we used to enjoy became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Gone were the laughter-filled afternoons spent exchanging stories over tea. Now, sitting alone in my living room, I found myself staring at old photographs, wondering if anyone would remember us when we were gone. The silence in my home grew heavier with each passing day, a constant companion that whispered cruel truths about loneliness and the inevitability of death. It wasn't just the absence of my friends that hurt, it was the realization that life moves forward whether you're ready or not. Their deaths forced me to confront questions I had long avoided. Who will mourn me when I'm gone? Will my grandchildren even remember my name? These thoughts haunted me during sleepless nights, amplifying the ache of isolation. I tried to fill the void by throwing myself into household chores, cooking elaborate meals no one wanted, and cleaning rooms that didn't need it. But no amount of activity could drown out the emptiness inside. Even worse, I noticed my own children growing distant, preoccupied with their own lives and struggles. They visited less frequently, and when they did, our conversations revolved around practical matters, bills, medications, household repairs, rather than meaningful connection. Yet amidst the despair, a small voice within me refused to give up. If I couldn't turn back time or bring back my friends, maybe I could still find a way to adapt to this new world. I remembered something I had read in a magazine years ago. Learning is the fountain of youth. It sounded cliche, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I decided to start small. With trembling hands, I picked up my daughter's old tablet and opened a tutorial video on YouTube. The instructor spoke quickly, using terms I didn't understand, but I replayed the video over and over until the steps began to make sense. Slowly, painstakingly, I taught myself how to send emails, browse websites, and even use social media. Every tiny success felt like a victory against the forces trying to pull me under. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, delicate thing, but hope nonetheless. As the years stretched on, I found myself sinking deeper into a dark abyss of loneliness and self-doubt. The weight of my failures, my financial collapse, fractured family relationships, an inability to adapt to modern technology pressed down on me like an invisible force that left me gasping for air. Each morning I woke up to the same suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of distant traffic or the occasional chirp of birds outside my window. But it wasn't just physical solitude that consumed me. It was the gnawing realization that I had become utterly useless in the eyes of those around me. My grandchildren no longer sought my advice. My children avoided discussing anything meaningful with me. And even my friends, the few who remained alive, seemed too busy with their own lives to notice mine falling apart. The crisis deepened when I began questioning whether there was any point in trying anymore. Wasn't it already too late? After all, society had its rigid expectations of what aging should look like. Older adults were supposed to be wise yet humble, content yet unobtrusive, grateful yet invisible. These conflicting ideals haunted me every day. On one hand, I wanted desperately to reclaim some sense of purpose, to prove to myself and others that I still mattered. But on the other hand, doubt whispered relentlessly in my ear, telling me that change at this stage of life was impossible, even futile. Who would listen to an old woman whose voice trembled, whose hands shook, whose very presence seemed to remind everyone of mortality? One particularly bleak afternoon, as rain lashed against my windows, I sat staring at a blank television screen for hours, unable to muster the energy to turn it on. The room felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because of the void within me. Memories flooded back, memories of laughter-filled family dinners, long walks through vibrant parks, and nights spent reading bedtime stories to my grandchildren. Now those moments felt like relics from another lifetime, ones I could never retrieve. A single thought echoed in my mind. What have I done to deserve this? It wasn't just sadness, it was rage, despair, guilt, and shame all tangled together, choking me until tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. But perhaps the cruelest blow came from the societal pressures I faced daily. Everywhere I turned, there were subtle reminders of how proper elderly people were expected to behave. At community gatherings, younger neighbors would exchange polite smiles while whispering about how stubborn or difficult certain seniors had become. Even well-meaning comments carried hidden judgments. "Oh, you're so lucky to have such wonderful children looking after you," someone once said, unaware that her words stung more than comforted. Lucky? To be pitied? To be seen as a burden? That was the narrative thrust upon me, and I hated it. Yet fighting against it felt like shouting into a storm, pointless, exhausting, and ultimately fruitless. This internal conflict between wanting to break free from these constraints and feeling trapped by them nearly broke me. There were days when I convinced myself that reinventing my life was possible, that I could learn new skills, rebuild strained relationships, and rediscover joy in simple pleasures. And then there were nights when despair clawed at my chest, whispering cruel truths. You're too old, too late, too irrelevant. This tug of war between hope and hopelessness became my constant companion, dragging me further into emotional turmoil. Yet amid this chaos, something inside me refused to surrender completely. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps resilience, or perhaps sheer stubbornness. But whatever it was, it kept me clinging to the faintest glimmer of possibility. I remembered a phrase I'd read somewhere: a broad heart sees beyond limitations. Could I truly open my heart wide enough to accept not just the world's imperfections, but also my own? Could I let go of the need to meet society's narrow definitions of success and happiness in old age? These questions lingered heavily in my mind, offering neither answers nor solace, but forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths. Slowly, painfully, I began taking small steps toward change, not grand gestures, but tiny acts of defiance against despair. I started journaling, pouring out my frustrations and fears onto paper. I reached out to an old friend, tentatively suggesting we meet for coffee. I forced myself to smile at strangers, even when my heart ached. Each action felt insignificant, almost laughable compared to the magnitude of my struggles. But over time, they accumulated into something greater, a fragile but undeniable shift in perspective. Life has a cruel way of testing us when we least expect it, And just when I thought I had begun to rebuild myself after years of hardship, tragedy struck again, this time with a ferocity that left me reeling. It was an ordinary autumn afternoon. The leaves were turning golden, painting the world in hues of warmth and nostalgia. I had decided to take a walk through the park, a ritual I cherished as it reminded me of simpler times before my health scare, financial collapse, and fractured family relationships. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As I crossed a busy intersection near the park entrance, a speeding car appeared out of nowhere. Time slowed to a crawl as its headlights bore down on me. My heart pounded like a war drum, and for a moment I felt certain this was how my story would end. The impact threw me several feet, leaving me sprawled on the cold pavement, gasping for air. The pain was excruciating, but what terrified me more was the realization that death had been mere inches away. Paramedics rushed me to the hospital where doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize me. When I finally regained consciousness days later, I found myself surrounded by machines once again, their incessant beeping echoing the fragility of life. This accident wasn't just another brush with mortality. It forced me to confront all the fears I'd buried deep inside. What if I hadn't survived? Would anyone have truly mourned me? Had I done enough to leave a meaningful legacy behind? As if surviving the accident wasn't harrowing enough, fate delivered yet another devastating blow while I was still recovering. My beloved daughter passed away suddenly from a rare illness. Her death shattered me in ways words cannot fully capture. She had always been my rock, the one who held our fractured family together despite her own struggles. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself, a piece of my soul torn away forever. The grief consumed me, wrapping itself around my heart like a suffocating vine. Family gatherings became unbearable without her laughter filling the room. Every photo of her brought both comfort and agony, reminding me of everything she had meant to us and everything we had lost. And then, as though determined to strip me of every shred of stability, a global financial crisis erupted, sending shockwaves through economies worldwide. News headlines screamed about collapsing markets, bankruptcies, and widespread panic. For weeks, I watched helplessly as the savings I had painstakingly rebuilt after being scammed dwindled to almost nothing. Investments I thought were safe evaporated overnight, leaving me staring at empty bank statements with trembling hands. Each number disappearing from my account felt like another nail in the coffin of my dignity. How could I face my grandchildren now? How could I explain that not only had I failed them financially once but twice? The weight of shame crushed me, making sleep impossible and waking hours unbearable. These cascading tragedies pushed me to the brink of despair. Nights blurred into days, and days melted into nights, each moment heavier than the last. I questioned whether there was any point in continuing. Wasn't it easier to give up, to let go of the overwhelming burden of existence? Yet amidst the darkness, memories of my daughter whispered softly, urging me to hold on. She had always believed in resilience, in finding light even in the darkest corners. Mom, she used to say, life tests us not to break us, but to show us how strong we really are. Those words echoed in my mind, refusing to let me succumb to hopelessness. I realized something profound during those agonizing months. Adversity doesn't define us, it reveals us. Yes, I had lost so much. The ability to walk unaided due to injuries from the accident, the love of my life in my daughter, and the financial security I had fought so hard to regain. But none of these losses defined who I was at my core. They revealed my weaknesses, yes, but also my strengths. Slowly, painfully, I began to piece myself back together. With physical therapy, I learned to walk again, step by agonizing step. Through tears and prayers, I honored my daughter's memory by committing to live the kind of life she would have wanted for me, one filled with purpose, gratitude, and love. To cope with the financial devastation, I embraced frugality with renewed determination. I sold possessions I no longer needed, downsized my living arrangements, and sought out community resources designed to support seniors in need. Though humbling, these actions gave me a surprising sense of empowerment. I discovered that true wealth lies not in material possessions or numbers on a bank statement, but in connections with others, with nature, and most importantly, with oneself. Looking back, I see now that these trials were not punishments, but lessons disguised as hardships. They taught me to cherish every breath, embrace imperfection, and find beauty in the brokenness. Life may deal us blows we never see coming, but it is our response to those blows that shapes who we become. And though my journey has been fraught with pain, loss, and uncertainty, I am grateful for the person I've grown into, a survivor, a fighter, and above all, someone who refuses to let life's storms extinguish the flame within. At 70, I never imagined I'd find myself sitting in front of a glowing screen, my trembling hands hovering over a keyboard like an amateur pianist about to perform her first recital. But here I was, determined, terrified, and utterly out of my depth. Learning technology at this age felt less like a challenge and more like scaling a mountain with no summit in sight. The world had moved on without me, leaving behind a labyrinth of apps, passwords, and touchscreens that seemed designed to exclude anyone over the age of 40. My grandchildren often joked that I lived in the Stone Age, but their laughter stung more than they realized. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was fear. Fear of being left behind, of becoming invisible in a society that valued speed and efficiency above all else. The breaking point came one rainy afternoon when I tried and failed to order groceries online for the third time. Frustration boiled over as I stared at the error message flashing across the screen. Payment declined. Was it my card, the app, or had I simply missed another step in this endless maze? Tears welled up in my eyes as I called my son for help, hating how small and helpless I sounded. His patience only made it worse. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word as if addressing a child. "Mom, you're pressing the wrong button," he said gently, though his sigh betrayed his exasperation. That night I vowed to conquer this beast, not for them, but for myself. If I couldn't adapt, I would lose not just convenience, but also dignity. Each day became a battle against self-doubt. YouTube tutorials became my lifeline, even though half the time I couldn't understand what the instructors were saying. Terms like cloud storage and digital wallet might as well have been alien languages. Yet something inside me refused to give up. Maybe it was pride or maybe it was desperation. But every tiny victory, a successful email sent, a video call made without glitches, felt like climbing Everest. Progress was agonizingly slow, but with each step forward, I reclaimed a sliver of independence. By the time I managed to navigate social media and join a virtual book club, I began to see technology not as an enemy, but as a bridge, a way to connect with others despite the physical distances between us. But mastering technology wasn't the only trial I faced. Another formidable opponent loomed large. Maintaining a consistent exercise routine despite the unforgiving weather, winter mornings were particularly brutal. The biting cold seeped through layers of clothing, making every step outside feel like walking into a freezer. My body ached from years of wear and tear, protesting even the simplest stretches. Still, I forced myself to rise before dawn, wrapping myself in scarves and gloves until I resembled a bundled-up mummy. Some days, the temptation to stay under the warmth of my blankets was almost irresistible. What difference would one missed workout make? But I knew better. Skipping even a single session meant risking the strength I had fought so hard to rebuild after my accident. There were moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. One icy morning, as snowflakes clung to my eyelashes and frost bit at my cheeks, I slipped on a patch of ice and landed hard on the pavement. Pain shot through my hip, and for a moment, I considered giving up entirely. Who was I kidding? A woman of my age shouldn't be pushing herself like this. But then I remembered the hospital bed, the machines beeping around me, the feeling of helplessness that had haunted me for months. No, I wouldn't go back to that. With gritted teeth, I pushed myself up and limped home, vowing to try again tomorrow. Perhaps the greatest challenge of all, however, was me bridging the generational divide. For years, I had prided myself on being wise and experienced, qualities I assumed would naturally earn me respect. But the younger generation saw things differently. They didn't want advice. They wanted relatability. At family gatherings, I noticed how conversations shifted whenever I entered the room, how topics drifted toward trends and memes I couldn't comprehend. Once during dinner, my grandson mentioned something called TikTok, describing it with such enthusiasm that I decided to ask him about it later. His response stunned me. "Grandma, you wouldn't get it." Those 5 words cut deeper than any insult ever could. Did they really think I was incapable of understanding their world? Determined to prove them wrong, I dove headfirst into modern culture. I started watching viral videos, reading articles about pop culture, and even attempting to use slang, though I'm sure I butchered most of it. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt foolish, asking questions that seemed obvious to everyone else, but slowly, painfully, I began to earn their attention and eventually their respect. When I surprised my granddaughter by correctly referencing a popular meme during a game night, she looked at me with wide-eyed amazement. "Wow, Grandma, you're actually cool," she exclaimed. Those words meant more to me than she could possibly know. Looking back, I realized these challenges weren't obstacles. They were opportunities. Each struggle taught me resilience, adaptability, and the importance of embracing change. Yes, learning technology at 70 plus was daunting. Exercising in freezing temperatures was grueling, and keeping up with Generation Z was exhausting. But none of it broke me. Instead, it shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than I ever thought possible. Life may have thrown its worst at me, but I refused to crumble. And in doing so, I discovered that age is not a barrier. It's merely a number. What truly matters is the courage to keep moving forward. I am forward, no matter how steep the climb.